Hey friends, so it is Friday the 13th in October. It doesn't get any spookier. So let's talk about the scariest thing about homeschooling for a lot of people, which is socialization. So today's video is hosted by Shana over at Making Everyday Magic, and it is a bunch of us secular homeschool moms sharing with you all about homeschool and socialization and what we do about all that and our thoughts on all of it. So I hope you will come along and watch my video as well as Shana's and the rest of the moms on the playlist that I'm linking down in the description, and I'll try to remember to put it up here in the card. But come along and let's talk about the scary socialization. So if you're new here, my name is Nikki. I'm a homeschooling mom of 4. I've got this year an 8th grader, a 4th grader, a kindergartner, and then she's pre-K age, doing preschool, pre-K, a little bit of kindergarten work. And I have been homeschooling since the beginning, since my oldest turned 5. We started doing formal lessons with her. I'm not a big proponent of doing a lot of schooling in before kindergarten, before they're 5, 6, even though my youngest is doing that now. That's not that she's the only one that has, and it's by her choice, not by me saying that she has to do it. She chose to do school. She wants to do school things, so I let her do them because she wants to, not because I think that she should. I don't really prescribe to doing a bunch of preschool stuff because they kind of learn through play. Learning through play is important at that age, and that's kind of what we focus on. So so I started with my oldest when she was in 5th grade. This is now not in 5th grade. She was 5 in kindergarten. This is now her 8th grade year, so that's 9 years. The math is always a little confusing, but I'm pretty sure it's 9 years. And so that is a little bit about me. So let's dive into the questions that Shana has asked for us to share. Okay, so the first question is, have you always homeschooled? And I knew that was the question, so I think that's why I kind of answered that in my intro. But yes, we've always homeschooled. We've never done anything different. However, I was a public school teacher prior to having my oldest. I finished out the year after my oldest was born, and then I didn't go back to teaching after that. So I do have some public school experience other than me. I went to public school, then I taught public school, but then my children have always been homeschooled. They've never gone to public school. Question number 2, and I'm just going to read them from a list, so sorry I'm looking down. It's, what are your fears surrounding socialization and your decision to homeschool? So I have to admit, I've said it on here before, my youngest sister was homeschooled for 1 year, and when she was, I was one of those people that said, but how is she going to, have friends? How is she going to, be, I didn't use the word socialize back then, but I was like, she's not going to have any friends. She's going to be, a weird homeschooler, and so I was that person. And even my sister-in-law started homeschooling my nephews before I started, and even when she started, I was still on that, but how are you, I couldn't stand being in the house all day, still in that mindset, because I didn't truly honestly know that socialization is not something you have to worry about. So I was that person, and I am glad to say that I'm not that person anymore. It is a very common question that I get, so I'm really excited about this video because I don't think I've done one like this before, but yeah, so I was that person, and so I guess those fears were kind of there. But for me, the reason we started homeschooling is because my oldest daughter was so uncomfortable in social settings and groups of people, just being loud and having lots going on. She would get overstimulated. So for me, part of why I chose homeschool was because she wasn't going to be putting into these forced situations of classrooms and things like that. So for me, I wasn't really afraid of her not being socialized. I was kind of homeschooling to keep her less socialized, which is kind of backwards from what a lot of people do. And of course, not keep her completely unsocialized, but we needed to have socialization in more controlled settings where I could be there to support for her and for things like that. So for me, I never really had fears about, are my kids going to get socialized? Even though that was who I was before, when I started homeschooling, that wasn't a fear for me. And it's definitely not a fear now, because my kids are definitely socialized. Number 3, how in your experience have those fears been true? So again, not that was a fear of mine going into it. However, none of what I thought prior, my sister wasn't unsocialized. She was doing horseback riding and had friends in that. I think she was doing soccer too at the time or something, and had friends in that. They didn't, it was only for 1 year, so they didn't necessarily get into a homeschool community, and that was a while back. There wasn't necessarily a big one back then. But she didn't not have friends. She had plenty of friends. And then I saw that, and then I saw my sister-in-law start homeschooling my nephew, and I saw that they didn't just sit at home all day every day. They went and did things, and they socialized, and I had to change my mindset about what socialization is. So what you have in public school is really forced socialization. They're forced into a classroom. They don't get to choose who's in there with them. And it's all kids their same age. And is that really truly socializing your children? Because the world isn't everybody the same age. The world is people of all different ages, and they need to understand how to interact with people who are the same age as them, but also with people who are older than them and people who are younger with them. And how do we treat different groups of people? I don't find any of what I might have feared or what I might have thought before to be true at all with homeschooling. Now, it can be if you choose not to look for socialization. We do have to look a little bit harder as homeschoolers for making sure that our children have outlets for socialization as far as like friends go. But if you're taking them out in the world, they're getting socialized with, the world, which is the goal, right? But you do have to work a little bit harder to make sure they have friends. You have to find groups, and you have to find, they have to be in some kind of extracurricular or find co-op groups or do something like that. So it is a little bit of extra effort, but I've no fear that anybody, mine or anybody else's that I've talked to or heard about, none of those fears are ever true. So I don't find any of them to be true. The next question is, how have those turned out to be false? All of them have for us. My children are super socialized. They can sit in a restaurant. They're so well behaved. We are always complimented on how well behaved our children are out in public, because we're out in public all the time. They understand how to behave out in public because we're doing it. We're experiencing it. We're being part of the world all of the time. So they don't, they're socialized. And then we have, I have made an effort. My youngest was in dance my oldest was in dance at the time we started homeschooling. So we didn't necessarily make a lot of homeschool friends there, because most of those kids were in public school. But she still has friends from that time. And that she still occasionally talks to, and one of them that she's really good friends with, actually 2 of them that she's really good friends with. So the sports, have been able to help her create, not sports, but like extracurriculars. She does play soccer. She, played soccer on a soccer team with a bunch of her homeschool friends. And we have co-op, and that's where she's made her strongest friendships. And so my kids are socialized. They have friends. They can go out into public, and they can go to the grocery store and behave properly, and they can go to the movies and behave properly, because we do it all of the time. So all of those fears that people have of, are my children going to be socialized, or how do they get to be socialized? How can they interact in the world? Well, they're doing it every day. So they're interacting with the world every day, so they're learning how. Okay, so question number 5. How has being a secular homeschool impacted your homeschool socialization? I would say we are fortunate in my area to have a nice, large, secular homeschool group. There are lots of secular homeschoolers, and it seems like more and more every day with all of everything that's been going on in the world. Lots of families who chose public school in the beginning are switching now, and those tend to be families that want their education at least to be secular. And so we are very fortunate that I don't think secular has caused any problems for us. Our group that we're in is not technically secular. It's just very accepting. Like, we just accept everyone, and no one talks about, or not talks about, but nobody tries to put their religion or their political beliefs or anything on anybody else. It's just something we leave out of it. We are there for education and education only. And we just try to keep our content very neutral. And so we're just so fortunate to have that I haven't found secular being any kind of problem. But I will say, like, there are non-secular groups in our community. And so even when we're doing things and we happen to be there with other, non-secular community members who also homeschool, I've never seen it to be a problem. It's never been a problem for us. So it might be possible that we're fortunate in that. But I think, the more and more people that come to homeschooling, we're getting a more diverse group of people who homeschool, and it's easier to find your people, Number 6, what are your observations about the socialization debate? It's always something that comes up, but I think it's so easily explained, so easily, actually that's not something that happens, because my children are out in the world every day. They're socializing with people of all ages. They're learning how to be a citizen. They're learning how to do things for their community, because that's something that we focus on, is community and being part of a community, and how to make your community better and things like that. And so I think once you kind of explain all of that to somebody, they kind of understand that, maybe, just maybe, that's not something that I need to worry about if I was going to homeschool, or if my family is deciding to homeschool their children. So I feel like it's a pretty easy debate to end when you give such great evidence of, how that is not something that you need to worry about. Number 7, what do you do to make sure your kids get social time? So again, this is something that as homeschoolers we have to think about just a little bit harder, because, in public school, they're in the classroom, they're playing, they're making friends, they're learning how to make friends, albeit with all children their own age, which, I have feelings about that. But so you do have to make an extra little effort. You do have to put them in extracurriculars, or you do have to find some kind of homeschool community, whether that's a co-op or weekly play dates with other homeschoolers, or field trips with other homeschoolers, or homeschool days at places like museums and things like that. You do have to make sure that you're putting those onto your schedule. So you do have to make sure you're putting in just a tiny bit of effort. But I promise it's super easy. I will say the first year we didn't do the the co-op, and I did feel a little separated. Again, we were still working on my child and getting her used to being in groups of people and things like that. So she was in a dance class. We weren't doing nothing at all. But I did feel like it was a little bit of a struggle to not, to kind of, because we were home more than we weren't, But as soon as we joined that co-op and became part of that homeschool community, it just got so much easier for us. I now had moms who I could talk to, who understood what I was going through. My children had people or kids that they could interact with and learn from, and in a relaxed setting where they didn't have to be away from me if they didn't want to. And it just, so I really would encourage you, if you are going to do this and this is something you're worried about, is make sure you put in that tiny little bit of effort to find yourself a homeschool community, because it does make a huge difference. So number 8, What tips do you have to help calm the fears of fellow homeschoolers about a lack of socialization? So again, if a new homeschooler was coming to me, I would just emphasize that you have to do some, you have to put in the effort to make sure that you're finding a community for yourselves. And so that my support for people in my area is to give them a list of different groups here, because not everybody's the same. Maybe they do want a Christian homeschool group. I know of some people who do that here so that I can point them in that direction. So if they do want to be, if they are more secular or they do want to be in kind of a nondescript group, I can point them in the direction of either our co-op or our community that the co-op was born from, and they get them in touch with those people and just encourage them to find somebody in your area that homeschools, because it's becoming so much more popular. Back when I started 9 years ago with my daughter, there wasn't a lot of groups out there that we could find. I think I only knew of 2. So my husband's boss's family homeschooled with classical conversations, and then when my sister was homeschooling here, they moved away shortly after, but I found the one group that we're part of now through her. And so there was really only those 2 groups. Now there are tons of them here. We have a Wild and Free group. We have a Charlotte Mason group, which is again not secular, but we have the classical conversations, a couple of them now. We have our group that is secular. We have another group that is secular also, but they only do field trips. They don't do co-ops and things like that. And so there are just so many groups you can choose to be a part of, and some of them cross over, the families cross over, and some of them don't. So there are just so many opportunities now that weren't even available 9 years ago. So I know there is somebody in your community that you can find, and it's as simple as going into Facebook. Facebook seems to be the best place to find these groups. But going into Facebook and searching for your town, whatever your town is, homeschool group or homeschool community, and I guarantee you something is going to come up. Or at least, even if you live in a really small town, at least something that's close by, some kind of, your city, your small town is probably surrounding some other big city, and so there's probably something there. So just encouraging people to find their community, it really does make a difference, not just for socializing your children, but also for mom. It makes a huge difference for mom or dad, if dad's homeschooling, or dad. We have a couple of dads at our co-op group. Okay, number 9. Is there anything about your journey relating to socialization that you would change? Joining that co-op, first thing. That would have been the one thing that I would have changed, because now, looking back, she probably needed that first year of adjustment, but once we got into that co-op, our second year of homeschooling, she became a whole different child. It was a smaller group, it was a pretty large group, but it was a smaller group of children. I was there for moral support. I didn't leave her, so she felt safe and secure in that. She was able to start learning to interact with children, what to do when she got overwhelmed, all of those things, all of that came from the co-op. My sanity got better because now all my friends had chosen to public school. When we chose homeschool, all of our friends at that time had chosen to public school. And so I didn't have anybody to relate to, and I didn't have, I wasn't watching YouTube at that point. There wasn't a lot of YouTube things. There were some blogs and whatnot, but I was very much on my own. And once I found that group, I was not on my own anymore. And it made such a difference. It just is. I know I've said it 97 times in this video, and I'm gonna keep saying it, but find your homeschool community. And last question, number 10, what has been the craziest comment you've received about socialization? I have been pretty fortunate that we live in a town that is pretty accepting of homeschool and always has been. I've never run into anyone necessarily in public that has made any sort of comment about that. Most of the time people are curious about our experience and how it's doing. I have had one cashier one time at the grocery store who was homeschooled, and she's like, "Oh, I hated being homeschooled. I wish my mom would have never done that." And I think maybe they didn't homeschool. They didn't find their homeschool community. They didn't put in the little bit of extra effort that was needed to make homeschooling fun, that I kind of feel like that's what that would have been. And my family has always been pretty supportive. A lot of my family, well, not a lot, but a couple of my family members are educators themselves. They're public school teachers themselves. And they understood why I would want to homeschool my kids. The only comment that anybody has ever made to me that I was like, was somebody said, did you not send her to school because you wanted to be with her? And I was like, at the time I was like, no, that's not the reason. Like, she needs this. This is for her. But after I thought about that for a long time, I was like, well, yeah, kind of. Like, yeah, I didn't want to send her off for half the day. I love her. I want to be with her. So I don't see that as a wrong thing to want to be with my children. And so that I think is probably the most like, and the person who said it to me said it out of love. It wasn't a criticism or it was just generally like a genuinely curiosity question. And even though I said no at the time, now my answer is yeah, I want to be with my kid, and I think that's okay to want to be with your kid. And so we have been pretty fortunate to not really, but a lot of people, like, as I said, a lot of people in our lives have homeschooled before, so most of my family had some kind of exposure to it and seeing that it's not a negative thing. And the town that we live in is just a really good town to homeschool in. So I've never really had anything too negative been thrown at my way about socializing. And all of our public school friends, they see that my kids have friends and that we're always doing things, and I think we just have gotten lucky to not have too much negativity brought our way about our homeschooling situation. And so I'm grateful for that, but that means I don't have a lot of like words of wisdom here. I guess if I did have somebody that came at me with some negativity, I would just try to point them in the direction of, well, first of all, look at my children. Do they look unsocialized to you? And also just point them in the direction of the research, because there's research on everything, and it shows that, as long as you're putting in the effort to make some, provide the opportunities for interaction with other people, your children will be socialized. So this was probably a long and rambly video, and I know I probably repeated myself a billion times, but these are important things, and I think these are things that, like, if you have somebody in your life who is asking these questions and maybe being a little bit negative, just send them the link to this playlist, which is in the description, and they can see that several families that my kids have tons of friends. We do tons of things. We're always booked. Our calendar is always booked with birthday parties and celebrations and homeschool events and field trips and with homeschoolers, and we're just out in the world all the time. And when we're not doing those, we're at the grocery store, or we're at the a restaurant, and they're just being socialized in the everyday world. And so that would be kind of point them in the direction of the research and videos like this that show that homeschooling and socialization, socialization is not a negative in homeschool. It's actually a positive. So that is going to be it for me today. Again, thank you to Shana for hosting this collaboration over at Making Everyday Magic. I will link her channel. I'll try to link it up here and down in the description for sure. Please watch the playlist of all the other moms. I'm excited to see what they have, what their thoughts are and how their perspective might be different coming from a different area and a different family that doesn't have as much exposure to homeschooling maybe. And so, yeah, so that's going to be it for me today. If you would like to subscribe, I would really appreciate it. You can hit that button down below, ring that notification bell so you know when the next videos are coming out. I typically post on Mondays and Wednesdays. Sometimes I'll post on Fridays because we have collaborations and they tend to be on Fridays. And sometimes I post travel things on Fridays because we like to travel and I like to share those experiences with you guys. So that's going to be it for me today. I'm going to stop rambling. My dog is starting to make a bunch of noise. There's a prime example. So I am going to say see you guys later, and I hope you'll come back and chat with me again soon. Bye. Oh, don't forget you can follow us over on Instagram at Homeschoolology. Bye.